Thousands of people pass through the cafe every month. Wealthy executives, politicians, celebrities, and even dangerous men connected to powerful syndicates. None of them remembered the quiet waitress who served their coffee. Until one rainy morning she unknowingly handed a cup of coffee to the most feared mafia boss in Chicago, and everything changed. Rain slid down the massive glass windows of Blackwood Reserve Cafe, transforming the Chicago skyline into a blur of silver lights and shadows. The luxury cafe occupied the ground floor of one of the city's most prestigious office towers, attracting people who carried power in their briefcases and influence in their names. Every morning, expensive cars lined the curb while wealthy customers moved through the doors without noticing the people who served them. Avery Quinn had become one of those invisible people. At 26 years old, she had mastered the art of blending into the background. Her chestnut hair remained neatly tied back. Her uniform was always perfect. Her smile was always polite. Customers remembered the coffee. They rarely remembered her name. Most days she preferred it that way. Attention had never brought good things into her life. Behind her calm expression lived years of emotional scars she rarely allowed anyone to see. Childhood had taught her how quickly safety could disappear. Adulthood had taught her how difficult it was to rebuild once it was gone. Those experiences shaped her into someone emotionally controlled, careful with trust, and constantly aware of how fragile stability could be. Every decision she made revolved around one person: her younger brother Ethan. At 17, Ethan spent more time inside hospitals than classrooms. A chronic medical condition required ongoing treatment, medications, and specialist appointments. The expenses seemed endless. Avery worked extra shifts, skipped vacations, and sacrificed nearly everything to keep his future secure. The pressure never stopped. Neither did the fear. Every unexpected bill created anxiety. Every phone call from a hospital made her heart pound. Every month felt like a battle against circumstances she couldn't control. Yet she never complained. She simply kept moving forward. Outside, the storm intensified. Rain hammered against the windows while customers escaped the weather inside the warmth of the cafe. The rich smell of coffee filled the air. Soft jazz music played through hidden speakers. The atmosphere felt comfortable and elegant. For Avery, it was simply another workday. She moved between tables with practiced efficiency, taking orders and delivering drinks while remaining largely unnoticed. Sometimes she wondered if her entire life had become a series of routines designed to help everyone except herself. The thought lingered longer than usual that morning. Perhaps because exhaustion was beginning to catch up with her. Or perhaps because deep down she felt increasingly alone. Not physically alone. Emotionally alone. The kind of loneliness that settled quietly inside a person and stayed there. As she prepared another order behind the counter, a strange shift moved through the cafe. At first it was subtle. Several customers looked toward the entrance. Conversations softened. Even members of the staff seemed distracted. Avery barely noticed. She was focused on balancing multiple orders while calculating how many extra hours she would need this week to cover Ethan's next treatment payment. Then the cafe doors opened. Cold air swept inside. For reasons she couldn't explain, the atmosphere changed immediately. Avery glanced toward the entrance. Several men entered first. Not customers. Security. Their appearance was professional, expensive, and disciplined. Dark suits. Alert expressions. The type of men who seemed to observe everything without speaking. The sight immediately triggered curiosity throughout the room. A moment later, another figure entered behind them. Tall. Confident. Completely composed. The man moved through the cafe with quiet authority, as if every space naturally adjusted itself around him. Expensive black overcoat. Impeccable tailoring. Calm dark eyes that missed nothing. Avery quickly looked away. Customers like him belonged to a different world. A world of power. A world of influence. A world she had no interest entering. Several minutes later, his coffee order appeared on her tray. Just another customer. Just another cup of coffee. Nothing more. At least that was what she believed. Avery carefully approached the table and placed the drink in front of the stranger. As she did, their eyes met for the briefest moment. Something about his gaze unsettled her. Not because it felt threatening. Because it felt observant. As though he noticed things other people overlooked. The feeling lingered even after she walked away. Then something unusual happened. The moment the man stood from his seat, every member of his security team immediately rose with him. The entire cafe seemed to notice. Whispers spread quietly across the room. And for the first time all morning, Avery found herself wondering exactly who the mysterious stranger really was. Powerful men rarely notice ordinary women. But Damien Blackwood wasn't looking at Avery the way customers usually did. He was studying her, and for reasons he couldn't explain he came back the next day. The morning after their brief encounter, Avery arrived at Blackwood Reserve Café expecting another ordinary shift. The storm had passed, but gray clouds still hovered above Chicago's skyline. Customers filled the café as usual, carrying expensive briefcases, luxury watches, and conversations about business deals worth more money than Avery would earn in several years. She focused on work. That was always the safest option. The less attention she attracted, the easier life became. Yet throughout the morning, her mind occasionally drifted back to the mysterious customer from the day before. There had been something unusual about him. Not arrogance. Not entitlement. Something quieter. More controlled. The thought disappeared the moment the cafe doors opened. He had returned. Avery froze for half a second before forcing herself to continue arranging coffee cups behind the counter. The same security team entered first. The same atmosphere followed. And then Damien Blackwood stepped inside. Unlike most powerful men, Damien never demanded attention. He didn't need to. At 35 years old, he possessed the kind of presence that naturally altered every room he entered. Publicly, he was known as one of Chicago's most successful billionaires. His companies owned hotels, investment firms, technology ventures, and luxury real estate developments across the country. Very few people knew the complete truth. Behind the public image existed another empire. One built on loyalty, influence, and carefully maintained alliances stretching through powerful syndicates. A king hidden behind a businessman. A ruler who survived because he understood control better than anyone else. Damien rarely visited the same location twice. His schedule was precise. His habits disciplined. His decisions calculated. Which was exactly why his return made no sense. Even to him. As he took the same seat near the window, he found himself watching Avery again. Not constantly. Not obviously. Just enough to notice things others ignored. The way she carried herself. The way she remained calm during stressful rushes. The way she smiled politely without ever fully relaxing. Most people revealed themselves through words. Avery revealed herself through silence. Damien found that strangely fascinating. Over the next several days he returned again. Then once more. Soon enough, employees throughout the cafe began noticing the pattern. Customers changed. Schedules changed. Chicago weather changed. Yet Damien Blackwood kept returning. The whispers started quietly. Some assumed a business arrangement. Others assumed attraction. Nobody understood the reality. Damien himself struggled to explain it. Each visit simply left him wanting answers. Who was Avery Quinn when she wasn't serving coffee? Why did sadness seem to appear behind her eyes whenever she thought nobody was looking? Why did someone so young carry herself like a person accustomed to disappointment? Questions continued multiplying. Meanwhile, Avery's nervousness grew. Every time Damien entered the cafe, she became increasingly aware of his presence. She noticed how staff members immediately straightened themselves when he arrived. She noticed the respect surrounding him. She noticed how security personnel treated him less like a client and more like someone they would follow anywhere. The realization unsettled her. People like Damien belonged to a world she couldn't understand. A world built on power. And power often created danger. For someone who spent years protecting herself from uncertainty, the feeling was impossible to ignore. One evening after closing, Avery gathered her belongings and prepared for the walk home. The streets were quieter than usual. Cold winds swept between buildings while traffic lights reflected across damp pavement. She pulled her coat tighter and continued walking. Several blocks away, a black luxury vehicle remained parked unnoticed. Inside, Damien reviewed business reports while his security team completed routine observations. Then one detail caught their attention. A man standing across the street. Watching. Not approaching. Not interacting. Simply watching. At first it appeared harmless. But the next evening the same man appeared again. And the evening after that. Always at a distance. Always observing. Always leaving once Avery disappeared from sight. The pattern immediately triggered concern. Damien's security chief began quietly gathering information. The preliminary findings arrived late that night. What they discovered was enough to change everything. The unknown man wasn't random. He wasn't a passerby. And he wasn't there by coincidence. Someone had been tracking Avery Quinn's movements for weeks. As Damien studied the report, his expression became dangerously focused. Because according to the surveillance analysis, Avery wasn't merely struggling with financial problems. She was being followed. Every single night. Everyone believed Avery was hiding financial problems. Nobody knew she was actually hiding from a man who refused to let her disappear. For years, Avery Quinn had become an expert at making her struggles look ordinary. To her coworkers, she was simply a hardworking waitress carrying too many responsibilities. To her neighbors, she was a quiet woman focused on caring for her younger brother. To strangers, she was forgettable, invisible, safe from attention. That was exactly how she wanted it. Because the truth was far more complicated. Every morning she checked her surroundings before leaving home. Every unfamiliar phone call made her hesitate before answering. Every unexpected message tightened the knot of anxiety that permanently lived inside her chest. The fear never completely disappeared. It simply became part of her routine. Months earlier, Avery had walked away from a life that looked perfect from the outside. At the center of that life stood Logan Pierce. Successful, wealthy, admired. The type of man featured in business magazines and charity events. Logan owned luxury real estate companies across multiple states and moved comfortably through elite social circles. Most people considered him charming, influential, the perfect future husband. Avery once believed the same thing. In the beginning, Logan's attention felt flattering. His confidence felt reassuring. His ability to solve problems made her feel protected. Slowly, however, protection transformed into control. Control over where she went. Control over who she spent time with. Control over what dreams deserved support and which dreams should disappear. The changes happened gradually enough that she barely noticed them. Until one day she looked at her life and realized she no longer recognized it. The woman she used to be had vanished beneath someone else's expectations. Leaving had been the hardest decision she had ever made. Yet she had done it. She changed apartments, changed routines, changed almost everything. The fresh start wasn't perfect, but it was hers. For the first time in years, she controlled her own future. Or at least she thought she did. Across the city, Damian Blackwood sat inside his private office overlooking Chicago's skyline while reviewing the newest intelligence reports regarding Avery. Originally, curiosity had motivated the investigation. Now something else was beginning to take shape. Concern. The information arriving from his security team painted a troubling picture. Every report revealed another layer. Another hidden fear. Another reason Avery looked over her shoulder whenever she thought nobody noticed. Damian studied every detail carefully. The woman serving coffee each morning wasn't simply exhausted. She was hiding. She was escaping. She was surviving. The realization unsettled him more than expected. Perhaps because he recognized the signs. People living in fear often carried themselves differently. They monitored exits. They anticipated problems. They rarely relaxed completely. Avery displayed every one of those behaviors. The deeper his team investigated, the clearer the story became. Logan Pierce had never accepted the end of their relationship. Months after Avery disappeared, private investigators were still searching for her. Online activity was being monitored. Former friends received unexpected inquiries. Every potential lead attracted attention. Logan wasn't trying to move on. He was trying to reclaim control. The discovery triggered something cold inside Damian. His empire had been built on discipline and loyalty. He understood power better than most men. Real power protected. It created stability. It provided safety. What Logan was doing felt entirely different. Possession disguised as affection. Control disguised as concern. The distinction mattered. More than Damian cared to admit. Meanwhile, Avery remained completely unaware of the investigation happening around her. She continued working double shifts. Continued helping Ethan. Continued pretending everything was normal. But fear has a way of revealing itself. One evening after work, she noticed a familiar black sedan parked across the street. The vehicle wasn't doing anything suspicious. Yet something about it felt wrong. Her heart began pounding. Old memories surfaced instantly. For several moments she simply stood there, staring. Then the vehicle drove away. The encounter lasted less than a minute. The anxiety remained for hours. Elsewhere, Damian's security team made an alarming discovery of their own. Digital records, travel logs, private communications. The evidence pointed toward one unavoidable conclusion. Logan Pierce's search was becoming increasingly focused. The circle was getting smaller. And then the final report arrived. Damian opened the file expecting another routine update. Instead, his expression hardened immediately. Because surveillance data confirmed something none of them wanted to see. Logan Pierce was no longer searching blindly. He had already identified Avery's workplace. Blackwood Reserve Café. The place she visited every single day. The place where Damien first noticed her. And suddenly, the distance between Avery and her past became far more dangerous than anyone realized. One cup of coffee should have meant nothing. Yet Damien found himself rearranging meetings, delaying negotiations, and ignoring million-dollar decisions just to spend 5 extra minutes near Avery Quinn. For a man whose life revolved around schedules, discipline, and control, the change was impossible to ignore. Damien Blackwood had built his empire by treating time as one of his most valuable assets. Every meeting served a purpose. Every decision carried weight. Every movement was calculated. Yet somehow, a small café in downtown Chicago had quietly become part of his routine. Not because of the coffee. Because of Avery. Days turned into weeks. His visits became predictable. The same table near the window. The same quiet observations. The same feeling of calm he never found anywhere else. At first, Avery remained cautious. Experience had taught her that powerful men often came with complicated intentions. She kept conversations professional, maintaining the emotional distance that had protected her for years. Yet Damien never pressured her. He never demanded attention. Never pushed boundaries. Never tried to control the interaction. The patience slowly lowered her defenses. Their conversations began with ordinary topics. Chicago weather. Books left behind by customers. Funny moments from daily life. Nothing significant. Yet those simple exchanges became the part of her day she unexpectedly looked forward to. For the first time in years, talking to someone felt easy. Safe. The realization surprised her. Safety was not something Avery trusted easily. But Damien's presence carried a strange consistency. He appeared exactly the same every day. Calm. Reliable. Emotionally controlled. There was comfort in knowing what to expect. Without realizing it, she started smiling more. Her coworkers noticed first. The exhausted waitress who once moved through shifts like a ghost suddenly seemed lighter. The change was subtle but impossible to miss. Meanwhile, Damien noticed every difference. The way she laughed more often. The way her eyes seemed brighter. The way fear appeared less frequently when she looked over her shoulder. The observations should not have mattered. Yet they did. Far more than they should. One afternoon, a storm rolled across Chicago while the café remained unusually quiet. Avery found herself sharing details she normally kept private. Not everything. Just enough for Damien to understand the weight she carried. She spoke about Ethan. About hospital visits. About responsibility. About constantly feeling like failure was one unexpected expense away. Damien listened carefully. The information affected him more than expected. Perhaps because he recognized something familiar. Loneliness. Not the loneliness of being physically alone. The loneliness of carrying burdens nobody else fully understood. For all his power, Damien knew that feeling well. An empire surrounded him every day. Advisors, executives, loyal associates, security teams. Yet very few people actually knew him. Very few people saw beyond the king. Avery somehow did. That realization created a connection neither of them anticipated. Elsewhere, members of Damien's organization began noticing unusual patterns. Meetings were being rescheduled around cafe visits. Security routes increasingly passed through downtown. The king of Chicago's hidden empire seemed unusually interested in a waitress. Whispers quietly spread. Not criticism. Curiosity. Because Damien Blackwood rarely became emotionally invested in anything outside business and loyalty. Yet something about Avery had captured his attention completely. As the days passed, small protective routines naturally developed. Additional security quietly monitored the area around the cafe. Transportation routes were reviewed. Surveillance increased. Avery never noticed. Damien intended to keep it that way. Protection worked best when it remained invisible. The feeling surprised him. He had protected countless people connected to his empire. This felt different. Personal. Dangerously personal. One evening, after leaving the cafe, Damien found himself staring out the window of his vehicle while watching Avery lock the front doors behind her. The thought arrived unexpectedly. What? Not as possession. Not as ownership. Something deeper. A desire to protect. To shield. To keep safe. The realization unsettled him. Because powerful emotions often created vulnerabilities. And vulnerabilities were dangerous. The following morning, Damien arrived at the cafe earlier than usual. Something felt wrong immediately. The lights were on. Employees were present. Customers filled the tables. But Avery wasn't there. At first, nobody seemed concerned. She was rarely late. Perhaps traffic. Perhaps a family emergency. Perhaps a delayed train. Minutes became an hour. Calls went unanswered. Messages remained unread. Concern slowly transformed into alarm. Then the cafe manager approached Damien with visible worry. Avery had never missed a shift without notice. Not once. Damien's expression hardened instantly. A cold feeling settled inside his chest. Because somewhere deep down he already knew this wasn't an accident. And as another unanswered call echoed through the silence, one terrifying reality became impossible to ignore. Avery Quinn had disappeared. The safest place in Chicago wasn't a police station or a government building. It was the heavily guarded estate of the city's most feared mafia king. The moment Avery failed to appear for work, Damien Blackwood's entire world shifted into motion. Within hours, information began flowing through channels unavailable to ordinary people. Security teams reviewed surveillance footage. Transportation records were analyzed. Private investigators followed every lead. Damien's empire stretched across Chicago like an invisible network, and every part of it focused on a single objective: find Avery Quinn. Late that evening, the answer finally arrived. She hadn't been taken. She had run. The discovery brought temporary relief, but it also raised new questions. Avery was found several hours outside Chicago in a small lakeside town where she had rented a room under a different name. The location was modest, quiet, and far removed from the city she had spent months trying to survive in. Yet when Damien learned why she left, everything became painfully clear. Logan Pierce had reached out again. Not directly. Not openly. But through subtle reminders designed to create fear. A message sent through an old acquaintance. Questions being asked in places she once visited. Evidence that someone was getting closer. The pressure had worked. Fear convinced Avery that staying in Chicago would eventually place Ethan in danger. So she ran before anyone else could get hurt. When Damien finally arrived, he found her sitting alone beside a lake, staring at the dark water beneath an overcast sky. She looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone who had spent too many years running from shadows. For several moments neither spoke. The wind moved across the water while silence settled between them. Then Avery lowered her eyes. For the first time she allowed someone to see how tired she truly was. Tired of hiding. Tired of escaping. Tired of living every day expecting fear to find her again. Something shifted inside Damien as he listened. The powerful king who negotiated billion-dollar deals and controlled vast parts of an empire suddenly cared about only one thing: protecting her. Not because she needed saving. Because she deserved peace. Hours later, Avery found herself standing before the gates of Damien Blackwood's private estate. The property stretched across the shores of Lake Michigan like a hidden kingdom. Massive iron gates opened silently. Security teams monitored every entrance. Elegant stone pathways wound through perfectly maintained gardens. Warm lights glowed from a sprawling lakefront mansion that looked more like a private sanctuary than a residence. Avery stared in disbelief. She had spent years fighting simply to survive. This place felt like another world. Inside, the atmosphere surprised her even more. Nothing felt intimidating. Nothing felt threatening. The estate carried a strange sense of calm. Staff members treated her with kindness. Security personnel remained respectful. Everyone seemed connected through a quiet sense of loyalty that extended beyond employment. For the first time in years, Avery felt something unfamiliar. Safe. The feeling frightened her. Safety had always been temporary. Yet each passing day slowly challenged that belief. Mornings began with peaceful walks through private gardens overlooking the lake. Afternoons brought long stretches of quiet where nobody demanded explanations or expected perfection. Evenings felt calm enough for uninterrupted sleep. The changes happened gradually. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing slowed. The constant tension inside her chest began fading. Little by little, healing replaced survival. Meanwhile, Damien noticed every improvement. He noticed when she laughed. He noticed when she smiled. He noticed when she stopped checking over her shoulder every few minutes. The observations became increasingly personal. Dangerously personal. His empire remained his responsibility. His businesses still demanded attention. Yet somehow Avery occupied more space in his thoughts than either of those things. The realization unsettled him. Power had never complicated his life. Emotion did. One afternoon, while watching Avery walk through the gardens surrounded by blooming flowers and sunlight, a single thought appeared unexpectedly. What? Not ownership. Not control. Protection. A desire to become the shield standing between her and everything she feared. The feeling lingered. And with each passing day it grew stronger. For Avery, the estate slowly became something she never expected to find. A safe place. A home. A future she had almost stopped believing existed. She was not a victim. She became powerful every time she chose healing over fear. Every time she trusted instead of running. Every time she allowed herself to imagine happiness again. For a brief moment, it seemed like peace had finally arrived. Then everything changed. Late one evening, Damien received an encrypted file from his intelligence division. The information inside immediately captured his attention. Financial transfers. Private communications. Security reports. Evidence connecting someone inside his own organization to outside contacts. His expression hardened as he reviewed the details. Because the evidence pointed toward something he never expected. Someone inside the Blackwood Empire had been secretly sharing information. And if the report was accurate, the betrayal had already placed Avery directly in danger. The most dangerous enemies aren't always outside the gates. Sometimes they're already sitting at your table. For years, Damien Blackwood built his empire on one principle above all others. Loyalty. Money created opportunities. Power created influence. But loyalty created stability. It was the foundation holding together every business, every alliance, and every trusted relationship inside his organization. People remained part of the Blackwood Empire because they believed in the man leading it. Which was exactly why betrayal felt so dangerous. Late into the evening, Damien remained alone inside his private office overlooking Lake Michigan. Rain tapped softly against the windows while encrypted reports illuminated the screen before him. The information arriving from his intelligence division grew increasingly concerning with every update. Someone inside the empire had been leaking information. Not major secrets. Not financial records. Something far more specific. Avery. Movements. Schedules. Locations. The realization immediately shifted Damien's attention. Because only a small group of trusted people knew details about Avery's presence inside the estate. The circle was limited. The possibilities were troubling. Meanwhile, Avery remained unaware of the growing tension. The peaceful routine she had built over recent weeks continued. She spent mornings helping Ethan with online coursework and afternoons walking through the estate gardens. For the first time in years, her life felt stable. Yet she couldn't ignore subtle changes around her. Conversations stopped when she entered certain rooms. A few members of the organization seemed distant. Others appeared skeptical. At first she dismissed it. Then the whispers started. Quiet. Indirect. But impossible to miss. Some people believed she was becoming a problem. Others wondered whether Damien's growing attachment was clouding his judgment. Several influential members quietly questioned why the king of the Blackwood Empire seemed willing to risk so much for a woman he barely knew. The opinions spread faster than facts. Avery felt the difference immediately. Old fears resurfaced. The fear of not belonging. The fear of becoming a burden. The fear that everything good in her life would eventually disappear. One afternoon she stood alone beside the lake, staring across the water while uncertainty settled heavily inside her chest. Perhaps leaving would solve everything. Perhaps the safest choice was creating distance. The thought remained with her until Damien found her later that evening. He immediately noticed the concern in her expression, the hesitation, the emotional weight she was carrying. Without needing an explanation, he understood more than she realized. And for the first time since she arrived at the estate, Damien made his position unmistakably clear. The next morning, during a gathering of senior advisors and trusted associates, he addressed the growing tension directly. His words were calm, controlled, but impossible to misunderstand. Avery Quinn would remain under his protection. Any disrespect toward her would be treated as disrespect toward him. The message spread through the organization within hours. The whispers stopped. At least publicly. For Avery, the gesture meant more than Damien realized. Nobody had ever stood beside her so openly before. Nobody had ever chosen her over convenience. The realization strengthened the growing trust between them. At the same time, Damien intensified the investigation. Quietly. Patiently. The traitor remained hidden. But hidden didn't mean invisible. Patterns began emerging. Private communications. Unusual financial activity. Suspicious meetings occurring outside normal schedules. Each discovery narrowed the list of suspects. The evidence eventually pointed toward someone nobody expected. Someone trusted. Someone who had spent years earning a reputation for loyalty. The betrayal felt personal. Not because of business. Because the information being shared consistently centered around Avery. Someone wanted Logan Pierce informed. Someone wanted Logan close. The question was why. Several days later, the answer finally arrived. Money. Influence. Promises. The oldest motivations in history. The individual responsible believed helping Logan would create opportunities unavailable inside Damien's empire. The mistake would cost more than they realized. Unfortunately, the discovery came too late. Late one evening, Damien received an emergency notification from his intelligence team. The message contained a recovered communication sent only minutes earlier. His eyes scanned the contents once. Then again. The atmosphere inside the room instantly changed. Because the traitor had finally acted. A complete report containing Avery's exact location inside the estate had been delivered directly to Logan Pierce. Every detail. Every security routine. Every vulnerable moment. All of it. As Damien stared at the screen, a cold realization settled over him. The betrayal was no longer a threat waiting to happen. It had already happened. And somewhere beyond the estate walls, Logan Pierce now knew exactly where to find Avery Quinn. Entire syndicates had fought over territory, money, and power. This time, the conflict centered around one emotionally scarred woman who finally understood her own worth. The moment Damien learned that Logan Pierce knew Avery's exact location, the atmosphere inside the Blackwood estate changed. Not with panic. With certainty. Everyone understood what came next. For months, Logan had been chasing a version of Avery that no longer existed. He still believed she was the frightened woman who doubted herself. The woman who apologized for her own feelings. The woman who confused control with love. He was about to discover how wrong he was. Outside, Chicago continued moving as normal. Luxury towers reflected sunlight across the skyline. Business deals closed. Powerful people discussed profits and influence. Yet beneath the surface, tensions between multiple syndicates quietly reached a boiling point. The situation had become bigger than Avery. Logan's actions threatened alliances, trust, balance, and most importantly, Damien's authority. Several influential figures inside the syndicate world encouraged compromise. Some suggested distance. Others believed Avery should disappear again until tensions faded. For the first time in years, Damien ignored advice that benefited his empire. He chose her. The decision surprised even his closest associates. A king protected his empire. But Damien was protecting a woman. And somehow that mattered more. Meanwhile, Avery noticed the change immediately. Security increased. Schedules shifted. Meetings became more frequent. The invisible pressure surrounding the estate felt heavier with each passing day. Eventually she learned the truth. Logan knew where she was. The revelation brought back memories she thought she had left behind. Fear, doubt, uncertainty. For several hours, old emotions attempted to reclaim their place inside her heart. Then something unexpected happened. The fear didn't win. Because the woman standing inside the estate was no longer the same person who ran away months ago. Healing had changed her. Trust had changed her. She looked around and realized something important. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was building, growing, becoming. The realization felt powerful. That evening, a formal request arrived from Logan Pierce. Not a threat. Not a demand. A meeting. Private. Final. Logan wanted one last opportunity to speak with Avery. Against the advice of nearly everyone, Avery accepted. Not because she was afraid. Because she was finished being afraid. The meeting took place at a private lakeside property under careful supervision. Damien remained nearby, though he respected Avery's decision to face her past herself. When Logan finally saw her, confidence filled his expression. At first. Then confusion replaced it. Because Avery wasn't reacting the way he expected. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't asking permission to move forward. She simply stood there with quiet confidence. The difference unsettled him. For years, Logan built his influence through emotional control. He understood how to manipulate uncertainty. How to create dependency. How to make people question themselves. None of it worked anymore. Avery listened calmly. Patiently. And then, for the first time, she saw the relationship clearly. Logan never loved her. He loved controlling outcomes. He loved ownership. He loved certainty. The realization removed the final piece of emotional power he held over her. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. The frightened waitress disappeared completely. A queen began to emerge. Not because of wealth. Not because of Damien. Because she finally understood her own value. She was not a victim. She became powerful the day she stopped asking others to define her worth. Across the property, Damien watched from a distance. Pride mixed with admiration. He had spent months trying to protect Avery from danger. Now he realized she had become strong enough to face it herself. The feeling changed everything. What began as concern had become loyalty. What began as curiosity had become love. For the first time, Damien stopped viewing Avery as someone under his protection. He started seeing her as someone capable of standing beside him. An equal. The future suddenly felt different. Closer. More real. As the meeting ended, Logan finally understood that he had lost something he could never reclaim. Not Avery. Control. And without control he had nothing left. The conflict quietly came to an end. The fear that haunted Avery for years finally loosened its grip. Peace seemed possible. At least for a moment. Because later that night, while reviewing confidential documents recovered during the investigation, Avery discovered something hidden inside an old file connected to her childhood. A photograph. A name. And evidence suggesting that the story she believed about her family was incomplete. As she stared at the documents, her breath caught. Because the secret revealed one shocking possibility. Everything she thought she knew about her past might have been a lie. wasn't simply someone under his protection. She was home. The realization brought something rare to both of them. Belonging. Not temporary belonging. Permanent belonging. The kind people spend their entire lives searching for. Months later, the Blackwood estate hosted one of the most exclusive gatherings Chicago had ever seen. Business leaders, trusted allies, and influential figures from across the country attended. Yet the evening wasn't about power. It wasn't about wealth. It wasn't even about the empire. It was about family. Chosen family. The people who remained when everything else disappeared. As Avery moved through the room, she noticed something extraordinary. Nobody saw her as the waitress anymore. Nobody saw her as the woman who ran from her past. They saw her exactly as she had become. Confident. Respected. Powerful. A queen standing beside her king. For the first time in her life, she felt completely safe. The future stretched before her like an open road. And finally, she was ready for it. Late that night, after the celebration ended, Damien returned to his private office. A single package rested on his desk. No return address. No explanation. Curious, he opened it. Inside was an old photograph.